Welcome everyone to Around the NBA here on the Clear Path podcast. What we do in this little cast here is just go around the NBA, talk about the pertinent issues, things that are happening, and just talk a little bit about everything that's going on in the NBA. Today we don't have Jeff with us, so I'm just going to go over some of the big points of this week. So first off, let's talk a little bit about Chet versus Wemby. Obviously, that matchup happened, I believe, Tuesday night. So I guess 2 days ago or so. Essentially, we saw that Chet during this game and Wemby during this game really struggled on the offensive end. They both had pretty inefficient nights. But something I did want to highlight first about Chet is he focuses on efficiency. It's very rare for him to have really underperforming shooting nights. He's actually a 48% three-point shooter this season, around 60% effective field goal percentage, which is fairly normal for a center in terms of effective field goal percentage, just because he is taking so many easy dunks, layups, things like that around the paint. But an important point is that he is really good from the three-point line, like actually a credible shooter and somebody that centers actually have to go up and guard. And that's a huge factor when I feel like opponents are guarding them, just because it's going to be a big deal to kind of have a three-point shooter that can space the floor and somebody that people like Kevon Looney or Brook Lopez are really going to need to go out of the paint and actually guard, which leads to more driving lanes and more space specifically for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So really, he kind of operates as more of a perfect fit for this team, the OKC Thunder, who don't really play a traditional center and probably don't want a traditional center in terms of somebody like Brook Lopez or like a lesser version of Brook Lopez who can't shoot the three. But Wemby provides that grit and grind type of mentality that a center would provide, and definitely is good on the defensive end, averaging 2 blocks per game. But he definitely allows for spacing, which is important for the OKC Thunder. He's definitely probably tied with Wemby in terms of rookie of the year. He's going to play efficiently. His stats might not be all that great in terms of counting stats, but his efficiency, I think, will be good. Juxtapose that with Wemby. He's definitely had a lot of struggles this season, as well as some really high points. You look at the Phoenix Suns game where he scored over 30 as one of the high points. And it seems like a big factor in Wembanyama's struggles to me, just watching the games and from what I can see, is not actually Wembanyama being bad. It's more of Wemby doesn't have a point guard who's going to get him the ball in the right places. You see a lot of turnovers around him just because they don't know how high they can throw the ball, where they can throw the ball, how open he is pretty much all the time, honestly, just because of his height advantage over most people. And how a mismatch for Wemby is like, for most players, you're going to win like 60-70% of your mismatches because, I mean, there's still an NBA player on the other side, unless it's like a super small NBA player. But for Wemby, if the center isn't guarding him or like the power forward on the opponent's team, it's pretty much like a straight up bucket. Like, especially if he's within like a couple feet of the basket, it's going to be an easy dunk. He's going to make it every single time almost. He doesn't need to turn around, doesn't need to do anything fancy. And I think if you are going to criticize Wemby in some way, it's that his back to the basket game just isn't there yet. And he can develop one for sure just because of his size, but maybe the strength part also hasn't been developed as much as it needs to be for that huge back to the basket game. But just his size alone, I mean, he can honestly probably reach from the block of the basketball court all the way to the rim, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. And just that the ability that allows you to do is kind of insane. But talking about Wemby on the other end, Chet is good on the defensive end, averaging 2 blocks per game for a team that definitely needs him as a shot blocker. But Wemby is honestly extraordinary. I think early in the season, he was forcing opponents to like 19% or less on three-point shots. And it's actually crazy how much he affects shots. I think the blocks obviously tell a story, averaging over 2 blocks a game easily. But I think the missed shots, whenever he is closing out to a three-point shooter or is guarding somebody pretty closely, people feel his presence. Even if he doesn't get the shot and block it or tip it or anything like that, people shoot a little bit higher, it feels like to me, just when watching the game, just to try to get it over him, which in the end makes their shot a little bit worse and makes it go offline a lot. And I think that will be the case for his whole career. And in fact, he might even get better at this. So you're expecting an elite defensive player from Wembanyama, which is kind of crazy. I mean, this early in someone's career, I think Evan Mobley was probably the last player to be elite defensively as a pure rookie. And I think Wembanyama has the chance to be not way better, but even better than that as a rookie. But this team is still not going anywhere just because Wembanyama doesn't have a point guard to get him the ball. And I think, honestly, they're interested in tanking. Otherwise, they would have signed a point guard before this season. And Devin Vassell is probably the second best player on this team. And he's a good player, but he's not somebody who's really going to get Wembanyama involved. Now, the next point of conversation is definitely about the Bucks. The Bucks have been really struggling this year. So what we have seen this year is that the Dame Giannis pairing isn't working as good as people thought it would. So the first part of it is just Dame in general. Dame's definitely in a shooting slump over the first 10 or so games. He's averaging 27% from three. His PER fell about 4 points. His assists per game have also fallen from 6 to 4. He's not a huge assister, but the fact that he's not comfortable with his teammates could definitely be affecting the stat. And his defense is just not there. He's defensive box plus minus on somebody like the Bucks, who they have a whole good team of pretty good defenders. He's definitely suffering in terms of the defensive end. And the biggest, I guess, difference is the difference between Drew Holiday's stat and Damian Lillard's stat is ginormous, just because of the amount of defensive versatility Drew Holiday has and his ability to actually lock down people, where Dame really doesn't have that ability. And then pair that with the fact that they're starting Malik Beasley, and obviously there's a lot of trouble. And Malik Beasley has been a big point of focus, I guess, for the Bucks, just because they initially kind of played him pretty much every minute that any of the starters played. But his point of attack defense has definitely been terrible for the Bucks this season. He's pretty much around Dame level in terms of how bad he is on defense. He tries a little bit harder, but he's just not a great point of attack defender. And honestly, it's not really his fault. They are putting him on the best opponent's point guard. I think you heard Adrian Griffin, their coach, talk about earlier in the season how they need him to be able to guard like Steph Curry's of the world, the Damian Lillards of the world. And that just never was going to happen. You can't just become good at defense overnight. It's going to take some time. So I think that's why he's been short. His minutes have been shortening just because he's been unable to guard, and the 3-point shooting that he has not been amazing, to be quite honest. And his defensive rating when he's on the floor is anywhere between 110 and 120, just depending on the night. And the lineups, specifically with Dame and Malik, the lineup data kind of shows that they kind of struggle. They aren't very good. And so maybe trading for somebody like a Jay Crowder, which they lost already for the season, could be good, just in terms of a guy who's a versatile defender to pair alongside Dame, who can actually guard point guards, which would be helpful. I think the biggest problem, though, with this team is that they thought that their drop coverage would fix all these problems. They thought that because Damian Lillard would just have to chase over screens, force people to go into Brook Lopez and Giannis in the paint, because they are still elite defenders, that this kind of scheme would continue to work. But what we're seeing is that Dame and Malik Beasley are not doing a great job of kind of pressuring people into going into the rim, which is causing the drop defender like Brook Lopez and Giannis to come up closer to the screen level, which when they come up closer to the screen level, that makes it even harder for them to actually recover and get back to the rim. The statistics kind of prove this out, with the Bucks being the best rim defense team and forcing the lowest field goal percentage by the rim last year. But this year, they're middle of the pack. And so that's a huge difference with a lineup that their whole strategy last year essentially was no rim and we'll let you shoot threes, but you're not going to get to the basket. And this year they're allowing baskets close to the rim and they're allowing 3-point shots. So it's like, what are you supposed to do? If you're allowing both shots, you just have a bad defense, which is, they don't have like a terrible defense, but they just don't have a top 5 defense right now, which is definitely a huge problem. All right, for this next segment, we'll go around the NBA, talk a little bit about each of these teams, some of them rising, some of them falling. We call them a risers and fallers segment. So first, the 76ers, definitely a big riser after the James Harden move. They've been incredible. I mean, Tyrese Maxey, he had a 50-point game recently. He's really showing his ability to be versatile and his ability to change the 76ers offense. He's great on the fast break, and now he's getting better in the half court offense. I think there's definitely even still some room to grow, which is kind of scary considering that, there's like a final form that could be reached, but they definitely are rising. I feel like in everyone's stock, kind of going into that slowly but surely, that upper echelon tier where we kind of had the Bucks and Celtics for a while. I feel like the Celtics have still maintained in tier 1 in terms of the East. The Bucks maybe fall into tier 2, and maybe the 76ers, I think, hope to join them there in that tier 2. The Timberwolves have also definitely risen. They had a really shaky start to the season, and Edwards, Cat, and Rudy Gobert, though, have been playing well. And I mean, I'd be amiss to mention they just beat the Warriors twice in a row. Both and Cat played well in each of those games respectively, and they were able to close it out and get a win. And I have to mention, obviously, the fight that Rudy Gobert and Draymond Green and Klay Thompson and Jaden McDaniels, I think those are all the people involved had. And I think what that shows is obviously Draymond Green suspended for 5 games. I think obviously Draymond did a little bit too much on that play. He didn't need to put him in a headlock, but I think people are missing the fact that, he obviously shouldn't touch another team's player and try to like grab him. And even if he didn't really grab him around the neck, I think just grabbing him might have triggered Draymond. But obviously, Draymond didn't need to react in such a demonstrative way. And so I think, both players are kind of in the wrong here. I understand the suspension for sure. The past history as like Joe Dumars, who's the NBA executive, I think executive commissioner or something like that, he handed down because of Draymond's history, which makes sense. He has a bad history, to be frank, and he's not exactly the model citizen of the NBA. But I think Draymond's role in this team is to be the enforcer, and he did his job essentially. So I think it's like kind of the situation where they're not surprised he got suspended. Maybe they're surprised at the length, is kind of what Steve Kerr said, but his role is to do things like that. Like that makes sense for who he is. I guess another big riser that I kind of didn't see coming is the Rockets. The Houston Rockets have been playing really good. They've been top 10 in offense, top 10 in defense. Albert Sengun has been playing really well. And I think Dylan Brooks' redemption arc might be like a big story of this season, just because he's taking less attempts than ever. He had one game this season where he's already took only 6 attempts from the field, which is his like basically almost career low. In the Grizzlies, he only had 1 or 2 games where he took 6 shots or less. And he's been really kind of a team player with everyone. And Sengun has been really good on the offensive end, and they have kind of taken up Ime Udoka's identity in terms of playing defense and then playing some smart offense, which I feel like is this team can continue this kind of stretch. They can definitely be a contender this year and make it into the play-in/playoffs potentially. Another big faller of this year is definitely the Clippers. After the James Harden trade, I believe they're 0-6 now, losing 6 straight games. It's kind of crazy how bad they've been recently. It's just weird. I feel like what you saw from the Nuggets game is that one of these guys has to be the odd man out. It seems like it might be Russell Westbrook too. Russell Westbrook didn't really close much of the game, and they took him out for large portions of this game. He only actually played like 25, 26 minutes, whereas the other starters played into the 30s. James Harden's been playing good individually in that Nuggets game. At least he played really well, but working with a team is something that's going to take time for him specifically, becoming the quote unquote system player or whatever, or he is the system. It's going to be tough to kind of build that system there. And a kind of underrated storyline, I guess, is how good is Kawhi Leonard anymore, or in the regular season specifically. I feel like you can't really evaluate him until the postseason, but these knee injuries might have caused his body to kind of break down a little bit. He's suffered so many over the years. He might not just be as good as he was before, or maybe it takes him some time to get into the season because he doesn't work out too much in the offseason in terms of basketball work just because of his knee condition, which would make perfect sense. Another big faller that I don't think people are talking about as much is the Pelicans. Some people, mainly Kendrick Perkins on ESPN and people like that, thought that the Pelicans could be a big threat in the West. And it's looking like right now there's some problems in New Orleans, and specifically with Zion Williamson. I think a lot of problems exist around how do we make a system around Zion, and do we trust ourselves to make a system around Zion? Because Zion is not a traditional player and he can't really guard his position. I think I talked about this earlier in a earlier podcast, but that makes it tough to the point where you need to kind of build a system around him and make players play in a way that showcases his ability and put people on the floor that can guard his position and also make up for his deficiencies like 3-point shooting and things of that nature. So I think this is going to take some time, but I think this team is not going to be an elite team this year. I think this team is going to have a lot of growing pains, and considering Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson's history, I think they kind of needed to start off strong and have a winning streak when they are all there. But right now they're not all there. I think CJ McCollum is already out with like a lung mishap or something like that. So I think it's important that they win when they're all there. And I think that this season might be tough for them if they're not all there for a significant amount of time, which it already looks like they probably won't be. As far as the last thing I wanted to talk about, an in-season tournament review. So obviously comment below kind of what your guys' thoughts are on the in-season tournament and how it's been going for you. I think it's been an interesting gimmick. I just feel like honestly already it's kind of lost a little bit of its luster. I feel like players are kind of like, yeah, we care about the in-season tournament. Yeah, like we want to do it. But then having like Steph Curry be out for one of the games, and then having like other players, I think just like the atmosphere being the same as like a regular season game. I think the Warriors Thunder game was crazy the other week, but I feel like after like kind of the opening night, some of these other games have kind of been less fun. And I think some of the groups are kind of unbalanced, like the Lakers group. Like the Lakers aren't even that great of a team, but they're going to win that group just because of how terrible all the other teams are in that group specifically. But overall, I mean, it's a good addition just to like create more interest. But do I think more people are actually watching on Tuesdays and Fridays because it's the in-season tournament? Honestly, no. I feel like it's only basketball people that are still watching, and they might not even treat it differently other than the fact that there's a different court. But that's all I got today for your Around the NBA podcast. Please like and subscribe, comment below your thoughts, and feel free to reach out. We've been growing recently, so happy to take any video suggestions if you guys make it towards the end of this video. Thank you.